Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. President Trump is increasing his rhetoric on immigration with less than 5 days until the midterm elections. At the White House Thursday, the president unveiled a plan to deny asylum seekers, saying anyone who tries to enter the United States between ports of entry will be automatically sent back, and calling asylum seekers the, quote, biggest loophole in the U.S. immigration system.
My administration is finalizing a plan to end the rampant abuse of our asylum system. It's abused, to halt the dangerous influx and to establish control over America's sovereign borders. We've got borders. And once that control is set and standardized and made very strong, including the building of the wall, which we've already started, $1.6 billion spent last year, $1.6 billion this year. We have another 1.6 that will be coming, but we want to build it at one time. All it does is turn people in a different direction if you don't. We want to build it at one time. Under this plan, the illegal aliens will no longer get a free pass into our country by lodging meritless claims in seeking asylum. Instead, migrants seeking asylum will have to present themselves lawfully at a port of entry.
You heard President Trump say that he plans to sign an executive order that would require migrants to claim asylum only at ports of entry. But here's what the law says, quote, in general, any alien who is physically present in the United States or who arrives in the United States, whether or not at a designated port of arrival, may apply for asylum. Joining me now are CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, CBSN political contributor and political reporter for The Guardian, Sabrina Siddiqui, and NPR White House correspondent Ayesha Rascoe. Welcome to you all. Ayesha, I want to start with you. Give us your sense, as someone who covers the White House day in and day out, what you know about this new policy proposal regarding the topic of asylum. Is this something that you have been giving many details about?
It's not something that the White House has been given many details about, and that seems to be the case with a lot of this. It doesn't seem to be much in the way of policy other than this idea that now asylum seekers will be turned back if they don't come to the port of entry. It's not clear whether how much the White House has studied this or whether you're going to get a formal proposal. And clearly it looks like this is going to be challenged by groups who will say it's unlawful.
Yeah, and so let's turn to the politics of this, Ed, because you have the president coming out 5 days before the midterms, right, basically announcing something that would seem to be sort of the latest in a series of moves aimed at focusing the spotlight on this issue of immigration.
Yeah, what's the difference between giving these remarks, which really, frankly, mirror a lot of what he says about immigration and the economy, in the Roosevelt Room of the White House versus on a campaign stage, as he will later tonight and will through the weekend? I mean, he's campaigning. He knows what works. What worked for him needs to work for a lot of these Republicans running and on the ballot next Tuesday, already on the ballot. And so the White House has decided we're going to let the president be the president. Well, the president talks about immigration, wants to talk about it, and wants to use the trappings of his office to essentially enact immigration policy, or at least say that he's enacting immigration policy. And they believe that will ultimately help drive out people. It has worked. We have seen anecdotal evidence and statistical evidence in polls across the country and in some of the national surveys that suggest immigration has creeped up as an issue of concern. People are talking about this issue and wondering why it isn't getting more coverage, when in fact it's just thousands of people who are marching thousands of miles to a border, and thousands of them may never make it there.
So let's talk a little bit more about this, Ayesha. The president has made several claims about the migrant caravan that is still hundreds of miles away from the U.S. border. Here's some of what the president said in an interview with ABC News.
We have to have a wall of people, very highly trained people, terrific, dedicated patriots. That's what they are. You have caravans coming up that look a lot larger than it's reported, actually. I mean, I'm pretty good at estimating crowd size, and I will tell you, they look a lot bigger than people would think. It's actually mostly young men and a lot of rough people, John. They're pushing the women right up into the front, not good, and they're pushing a few kids right up to the front.
But they're 900 miles away. The active duty military, you know the law. I mean, you're the president. Yep. They can't arrest people crossing the border. They can't.
It depends. It depends. National emergency covers a lot of territory. They can't invade our country. You look at that; it almost looks like an invasion. It really does look like an invasion.
All right. So, Ayesha, what more information or detail have we heard from the president? Because it's interesting, in that Roosevelt Room announcement, there was some Q&A, and this topic came up. And the president seemed to speak a little bit differently, too, regarding people who might decide to throw rocks. What did he say about that?
Well, he said that he would tell the military to treat them like firearms. So it's unclear whether he was insinuating that he would want the military to fire on this caravan. But by law, the military cannot be used within the U.S. border as a police force. So that is against the law. They can't do that. Mm-hmm. So the way that he's talking about using the military is really not in a way that the military is supposed to be used in the U.S. So it's really not clear what he's trying to do. And the Department of Defense said that that the military will be helping with operations, with logistics. They haven't said anything about this idea of them policing.
And against this backdrop, we also have, Sabrina, the president tweeting a new campaign video Wednesday, which falsely blamed Democrats for a case in which a man in the U.S. illegally was convicted of killing a police officer. How does that play with both Republican voters as well as undecideds?
Well, this is frankly the same strategy that the president used obviously to some success when he was running in 2016. And one of the most common themes that you saw at his campaign rallies, even at the Republican National Convention, was the president bringing out family members and relatives of victims who were killed by undocumented immigrants. And part of that has been, of course, to try and stoke fears around immigrants who are coming to this country. Of course, ignoring the fact that studies have shown, and numerous studies have shown, in fact, that immigrants are less likely to commit crime than the native-born population. And that has remained true even as the immigration population has risen. But obviously the president knows that his base feels very strongly about not just illegal immigration, but also legal immigration. And you're seeing that strategy play out, not just in the video that the president put out today, but even in the ads that Republicans are running across the country down ballot. And so they very much are hoping to make this a priority for Republicans as they go to the polls, because they do believe that it boosts turnout. Now, the question, of course, will be whether that has appeal with those who are more in the middle of the road, those independent-minded voters, and, of course, whether, in turn, this is something that energizes Democrats, who, of course, respond very forcefully to some of the rhetoric that is being used on the Republican side, particularly around immigration.
Yeah, and let me ask you about that, because immigration is clearly a very important issue to a lot of voters. Health care, however, is something that when you look at various polls, it tops the list in terms of being a priority. And Democrats have certainly tried to latch on to that, and they've really kind of focused their own campaigns, many of them, on this issue of health care. So I guess I'm wondering, is the president's focus on immigration perhaps something that might backfire if some voters feel they're not necessarily hearing enough from him and Republicans about that top issue?
Totally could. And I think what he's doing right now is designed more to pad and expand the Republican majority in the Senate. The White House has basically given up on the House. If they hadn't, he wouldn't be discussing these things in this way and going to the places where he's going. Look where he's going. Florida, twice. The northern end and the west coast of Florida, Republican hotbeds. Going to Missouri, going to Indiana tomorrow. These are places where Republicans are on the ballot in statewide or Senate elections, and that's why he figures it's good to talk about this stuff. Even in that clip with our buddy John Carl where he says, I'm good at counting crowd sizes, he's not. We all know that. But his supporters like that he keeps talking about that, because they see it as another, backhanded attack on the media for making that an issue on his first day. And so, again, he's just repeating the lines that have worked for him in the past, predicting, presuming, guessing that that'll be enough to draw out his coalition for guys like Josh Hawley and Rick Scott and Scott Walker up in Wisconsin and all across the country. And if it means talking about immigration on an issue that's thousands of miles away, they believe it's going to work, and they'll do it.
Well, Sabrina, that same poll we just showed shows more Republican voters associating with the president rather than the party itself. So what impact does that have on the messages of GOP candidates?
Well, I think it's very difficult for them because what it means is that they do have to really run effectively on Trumpism. Republicans entered this race hoping that it would be about the tax plan that they passed last year, and they learned that not only has the tax bill become increasingly unpopular with the American public, but it really wasn't a motivating factor for Republicans to go to the polls. The president is someone who does help boost turnout, and that's why he's taken a more expanded role on the campaign trail across the country. And he himself has acknowledged as much. I was at his Florida rally last night for Ron DeSantis, the gubernatorial candidate, as well as Rick Scott, the Republican Senate candidate. And the president said that these elections are very important, but 2016 was more important. So sort of a nod to his popularity, which I think very much speaks to the state of the Republican Party right now. He is certainly viewed as an asset in terms of mobilizing the base. But then at the same time, in some of these very close districts where the president is unpopular, he could very much still be a liability. And so I think they are very much picking very carefully where they put the president. But Republicans have no choice. It's a lot more difficult, I should say, for Republicans to really distance themselves if they're trying to appeal to the base in what is ultimately going to be a turnout election.
Sabrina, I think we can say he's not only nodding to his popularity, he's nodding to his ego, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's all about him.
Yeah, he talks about 2016 a lot on the trail, all the time.
Yeah.
You know, Ed, I want to bring up this quote that got our attention. It's from Jonathan Martin and Alex Burns in the New York Times, and they write, quote, "If the 2016 election hinged in large part on a rightward shift among working-class whites, Tuesday's House election may turn on an equally significant and opposite force, a generational break with republicanism among educated, wealthier whites, especially women who generally like the party's pro-business policies, but recoil from strident, divisive language on race and gender." So I guess the question right now is there any evidence at all of that? And if so, what is propelling that?
Do we have the map of the competitive House races across the country available? Because if you look at that, you see 4 congressional districts in suburban New Jersey, suburbs of New York and Philadelphia, where those exact people that Alex and J. Mart are talking about. You go to suburban Philadelphia, where they've redrawn the map, same difference there. Down in Florida, along the I-95 corridor, there's 3 different congressional districts full of those kinds of voters as well. Some of them are Hispanic and other groups that we break voters into. But yeah, it totally speaks to that. And if you see losses, big losses next week, in Republican-held House seats, it's going to be in places with those types of people. Suburban Virginia, suburban Denver, parts of Texas that are affluent suburban districts. And it could be a real problem for the Republican Party going forward, especially into a presidential election where the battle could be fought in those same exact places.
Ayesha, let me ask you, what does the officials tell you when you look at the president's sort of polarizing nature, you know, the fact that obviously he's got a large number of campaign rallies planned in these days before the midterms. He's only campaigning in states where there are heavily contested Senate races. So are officials there telling you anything at all about, you know, the understanding they have that his talents and time and energy are best focused in those places, and he understands full well the dynamics that are at play in these areas that Ed is talking about?
They know that this is going to be a difficult lift, and particularly in the House, that is going to be tough. It's usually tough for any president, but particularly for this president, who's very unpopular right now, that's going to be a tough lift for him. So, but they do believe that he is very popular with the base, and that he can really motivate, and by getting out there, he can energize people to get to the polls, and that's why they're putting him out there the way he is. I mean, they feel like he is his own best messenger, and he does get all the attention. He kind of sucks all the air out of the room, and they're hoping that will help kind of push some of these senators or some of these Senate candidates over the finish line.
So speaking of campaign rallies, Oprah Winfrey was in Georgia Thursday to campaign for gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams. Oprah used some of her time to dispel rumors of a potential 2020 presidential run.
And I want to make it very clear to all the press, everybody, I'm not here because I'm making some grandstand because I'm thinking about running myself. I don't want to run, okay? I'm not trying to test any waters. Don't want to go in those waters. I'm here today because of Stacey Abrams.
Okay, so Ed and Sabrina. Sabrina, let me start with you. She says, I don't want to run. She did not say, I will not run.
I think people have been speculating about Oprah's intentions ever since that speech she gave at the Golden Globes that centered on the Me Too movement and Time's Up. But ultimately, she's someone who is very popular across the country. And frankly, her popularity transcends partisan lines. And so, whether or not she would ultimately pursue a run for the White House, who can say, although no one, of course, thought that Donald Trump would be president. So he has paved the way for some of these celebrities or outsiders to believe that they may have a chance. But she's also on the stump for Stacey Abrams. Let's not forget that Oprah had endorsed Barack Obama in the 2008 Democratic presidential primary, and that proved to be very influential. She is someone who can help corral people to the polls, and I think that's really what she was out there to do in Georgia.
Before I get your take, Ed, we should note Oprah has been a part-time CBS News contributor for 60 Minutes, but she is stepping away from that role while she campaigns.
That's right. She's not walking the halls here. Look, she made very clear in her speech today that just like she showed up for then candidate Obama during the 2008 cycle, she was doing this for Abrams because she realized it was a very special and potentially historic moment. And she wanted to lend her celebrity status in a bid to implore Georgians to show up and vote. Basically say to people like her, look, you have a real opportunity here to make some history. You should make it.
So Vice President Mike Pence was also in Georgia Thursday to campaign for Abrams' opponent, Brian Kemp. Here's what he had to say.
Like I heard Oprah's in town today. And I heard Will Ferrell was going door to door the other day. Well, I'd like to remind Stacey and Oprah and Will Ferrell, I'm kind of a big deal too. I got a message for all Stacey Abrams' liberal Hollywood friends. This ain't Hollywood. This is Georgia.
Interesting.
Actually,
yes.
Isn't it now like the biggest movie production state outside of California?
Because they offer, incentives for filmmakers.
Fact check, not entirely true, Mr. Vice President.
Ayesha, let me ask you, though, when you look at that specific context, we heard, we heard the Vice President there, and it was interesting because the President, in his event in the Roosevelt Room, was asked about Oprah's comments. He sort of declined to go after her, but instead put the focus on the Republican candidate. It really seemed to underscore that this is a top priority for the White House.
They're definitely placing a priority on it. That's going to be one of the last places they visit on Sunday. They're going to be going to Georgia. And I think it is interesting that he didn't call out Oprah, President Trump clearly does not shy away from calling out celebrities. So the fact that he kind of held his punches there, that may say that maybe he's a little more concerned about taking her on. But I will say he talked about Stacey Abrams and basically said that she's unqualified. And that's she was the minority leader in the Georgia State House for years. So this idea that she's unqualified, it's not clear what he's basing that on. She has years of experience. She's Ivy League educated. So this is someone who has lots of experience.
Yeah, it'll be so fascinating to see what happens in Georgia next Tuesday. Ed O'Keefe, Sabrina Siddiqui, and Ayesha Rascoe, thanks to you all.